and welcome. This is the India Development Debate right here on ET Now. I'm Supriya Srinath and with me is my colleague Sandeep Gurumurthy. The Aadhaar mess seems to be only getting murkier by the day. Under fire for possible data leaks, the Unique Identification Authority of India has restricted access to nearly 5,000 employees to the portal. But the damage may have already been done. A report by an independent think tank, which is backed by none other than the RBI, says that Aadhaar is a sitting duck for cyber criminals. The Institute of Development and Research in Banking says a large-scale attack, which Aadhaar is very much vulnerable to, can create havoc and cripple the economy at large. The report goes on to state that in such an eventuality, the loss to the economy and citizens, quote-unquote, will be incalculable. Not just that, media reports suggest that anyone with your Aadhaar number can now dig out your bank details with a few strokes on their mobile phones.
Now, the Aadhaar frenzy raises some obvious questions. For one, many believe that the Modi government may have gone a little too far with its Aadhaar ambitions in what started as an identity verification program for direct transfer of subsidies has now become an all-in-one ID. The intentions may be noble, but without having enough built-in security measures, is the government right in Aadhaar-seeding mandatory for all financial transactions? As an aside, isn't the FIR against the media house and the journalist who reported the Aadhaar breaches first a clear case of shooting the messenger? On the India Development Debate tonight, we discuss the pros and cons of mandatory Aadhaar seeding and the road ahead for creating a balanced approach to the Aadhaar situation. Joining us on the show this evening is a whole host of experts. This is a non-political discussion because we don't believe you can politicize the issue of Aadhaar. Arvind Gupta, founder, Digital India Foundation; Pranesh Prakash, Policy Director, the Center for Internet and Society; Nikhil Pava, founder, editor and publisher of MediaNama.com; Nikhil Kumar, Head Partnerships and Alliances at iSpirit; and R. Jagannathan, editorial director at Swaraj magazine. We've got all corners covered in this debate this evening. I'm going to start off with you, Arvind Gupta. It's been 4 days since an outrageous attempt was made to attack the freedom of press. While we've seen some conciliatory tweets coming in from the Law and IT Minister, Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad. No action, no firm action has been taken to undo that damage. What do you think will it take for the government and for the UIDAI to withdraw that controversial FIR?
See, I think there are two parts to it. Number one, the FIR, the minister has clarified, is not against anybody in the media. As far as I understand, it's in general reporting what exactly had transpired, who all and what who all saw the data and how it was there, and it is reported that the people who are all the people who are involved. And I think there has been enough clarification both from the UIDI and as well as the minister himself that there is going to be no action against a particular journalist. UIDI has gone and written a letter saying that we're looking for more information so that I guess the system can be strengthened further. The exact process of obtaining the so-called data breach can be ascertained, and it can be improved in the future, that those loopholes can be plugged. And also the officials, whether they're government or the VLEs or the service providers, they can all be booked if they've done any criminal act. So that has been a clear stance on that, and that's the first part. The second part is uh, uh, whether Aadhaar, the breach that has happened, the so-called, has that caused any data breach or broken the trust of the security of the system? I think that there is no doubt that there has been a failure of the people and the process involved in managing the access and the controls accordingly, and this should raise an alert in terms of and the 5,000 people who have been given the new access or restricted access shows that there is a need to make sure that while there is technology, there is a need to make sure that the people and the processes also support the technology in terms of securing the data. They understand that they're dealing with very, very sensitive data, PII, personally identifiable information data, and trust needs to be built by making sure that the data, the access, the responsibility that has been given to them is used in a very accountable manner. So I think the people and the processes need to be strengthened. And that's the second takeaway I have from that.
So I think you've opened a lot of rooms for dialogue in terms of processes and sensitivity of the data. But I just want to address the elephant in the room, and that right now seems to be this acrimonious FIR that has been filed. Jaggi, the law minister says that the government respects the freedom of press. He didn't just say it in his tweet; he also addressed a press conference there, where he stated so. If it is true, then why is it that the UIDI asks for an FIR against a journalist? Don't you see this as being very, very unfair?
Yeah, it's completely wrong. As you said earlier, there is no need to shoot the messenger. If somebody has showed you, you should treat them as somebody who's doing an ethical hacker who showed you that something is wrong with your system. You better do something about it. So that's one part of it. But I think the UIDAI has backtracked. It has now said it's against unknown persons, it's not specifically against the journalists. And I hope they go back and pull back the thing. Then you should look at the officials who actually were willing to sell data. I think the government, this is too big a project, it's too important a project for India for the government to hasten in this kind of breakneck speed. If you do it at this speed, you are going to get serious problems, and you need to hasten slowly, you need to slow down so that you get your systems checked, you get everything done properly. And that's what, and UIDA should not assume that it knows all the right things. It should get an external audit done of the safety, privacy and security policy it is following. It should not be a purely government affair and done by babus. That's the most important thing to be done.
Think and proceed. Clearly, that's what the government needs to do as far as Aadhaar is concerned. Jaggi, sort of really summing it up there. But let me take it to you, Nikhil Kumar. Can you deny the fact that there is a great degree of callousness right now among users of Aadhaar data? Arvind Gupta spoke about the steps that have been taken. But even with that, do you agree? Can you deny the fact that there is great degree of callousness when it comes to Aadhaar data? And no system of accountability has been established yet, and which is what is worrying people, even neutral people. There is obviously an anti-Aadhaar gang, which is sort of no matter what will oppose Aadhaar. But even people who are sort of in the middle are worried about the fact that there is this degree of callousness and no system of accountability has been established. Nikhil Kumar.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. There's definitely merit to the concerns of people around accountability. I think it's just not with respect to Aadhaar alone. This is kind of across all the other things or other services that we expect from the government. This is one of those classical failures where a process is broken down because of people mismanagement and kind of misuse of power or probably access given to these people. I definitely think this should not have happened before. And I think today's action of revoking access to all the 5,000 officials who had the access is the right thing to do. And probably, as Jaggi said, UIDI needs to take time, and including the government, and spend more time and not hasten with processes or any new initiatives around Aadhaar until they get some of the basic foundations right.
I get your point about getting the basic foundations right, and I think one of the things that they are doing is restricting the access of such sensitive data to just about 5,000 employees. Even that's a big number. But Nikhil Pahwa, do you believe that's enough? Do you believe at least, the government is sensitive to this data and is now restricting it to a handful of people, 5,000 employees at best right now? Do you believe this is going to serve any purpose?
No, I think restricting access is a good idea, but I wish that their words followed their actions as well, because I've heard statements over the last few days that this is not sensitive information, and electoral rolls also have this information. I'm glad that Arvind is referring to it as personally identifiable data, which it is. One of the things I want to flag here is that there are also state resident data hubs which also have Aadhaar information, personally identifiable information. Some of them, I believe, also have biometric information. And so the problem with Aadhaar is that it's spread across so many databases now that you never know where the leak is going to come from. So I think one of the main things that needs to be done is that a complete audit needs to be done of all processes, because you don't know where the next leak or the next sort of tragedy is going to happen now. We've already seen government departments publishing personally identifiable information online, only to take it down later. They probably have been scraped by then. You've seen what's happened in case of the Tribune story. What's going to happen next, we don't know yet. But I can tell you one thing, that by the looking at the way things have been happening, it's only a matter of time. So there needs to be a complete suspension of the project right now, stop the enrollment, stop allowing authentication and eKYC, and do a complete independent audit, preferably with also an oversight from a multi-party, government committee that's going to look into both the security aspects as well as the privacy aspects. Because just the way this Tribune thing happened, anyone could make anyone an admin to give access to all this information.
Okay. Nikhil, if I may just interrupt you, you're making a very strong point there. You're calling for complete suspension of Aadhaar right now for the government to take stock. That's a very, very harsh suggestion that you're making, and we'll debate that with the rest of the panel. I can see Nikhil Kumar sort of nodding in disagreement there, but I have to take it to Jaggi because, in this issue, there is this, as Nandan Nilekani called it in our channel, there is this Khan market lobby and there is the rest of the country. And since Jaggi stays nowhere close to Khan market, only fair that I ask him this. Jaggi, in June of 2017, you wrote, and I quote, "The irrational haste with which the Modi government is rushing to make Aadhaar compulsory for almost any and every purpose will cost it dearly." You touched upon it briefly in your introductory remarks, but are your worst fears now coming true?
Yeah, I think so. When you have such a big project and which is meant to do so many things right in this country, getting and improving state capacity, the last thing you need to do is expand it to such a scale and size that where if you fail, you might fail big. I mean, it's like something. So Aadhaar is too big to fail, and that's the reason why it should be slowed down. If you do not slow it down, you will not know the chinks in the armor. You will not know what has to be fixed. So you need an external audit. This Babu audits will not work in this case. You need to know somebody who actually from the outside can actually, you need lots of ethical hackers working on it to check where all the weak points are. Fix those things before you roll it out further. And I think the Supreme Court verdict on the fundamental things will come up in a couple of weeks. And what if they, because of this, the government has to wind down the program substantially? It will be a huge loss. So the last thing they should do is to create a mess and make it easier for the Supreme Court to strike it down. You should not do that.
No, that's a very valid point, and you've got to step with caution. What if the Supreme Court strikes it down, and then what happens? How do you unwind? But on that very note, and if I can take the thought process forward and also add to the point that Nikhil Pava made earlier, Arvind Gupta, Nikhil Pava is talking about scrapping Aadhaar altogether. And Jaggi's opinion, of course, is that wait for the Supreme Court verdict, because what if they scrap it? What will you do? How will you wind it down? So there is the opinion on the table right now.
I said a suspension of Aadhaar.
Yes.
I said a suspension of Aadhaar, not a scrapping of Aadhaar.
Okay, suspension of Aadhaar is also big enough. Arvind Gupta, do you believe breaches like this, leaks like these, point us in a direction where one can toy with the idea, one perhaps needs to deliberate upon the idea that should Aadhaar be suspended?
I think these thoughts of suspension or going slow are unfounded from a basic. This breaches happen, and there's no denying that. It's brought down some major issues around accountability, around people, and as I said, around processes that have been adopted. And I think it's a very welcome suggestion that I think everybody's agreeing upon, whether it's on this panel or across social media, is on doing an independent audit. I think systems like this, which are such a huge digital infrastructure, go through many iterations. Aadhaar probably needs this, iteration of going to a new world of imminent cyber threats. So, in that situation, I think a new development, addition, making it more secure needs to keep happening. You cannot suspend it or slow it down. You need to plug the holes, and while you're doing that, you also need to together keep improving the system. I think this has become a very essential digital infrastructure for the country. It's saving a lot of money for the government. It's enabling, empowering people who never had access before, and either suspending it or whatever, shutting it down or slowing it down is not going to serve its purpose. um, I'm being a techie that I am, I can tell you there will be issues. No version of the software was the first correct version of the software. Um, and I don't I mean, I'm not saying it in a negative sense. I'm just saying it that one needs to constantly improve and work on these issues, and and that's why I've said that continuous feedback is the essential part. The feedback loop is an essential part of improving, very essential
Okay, fair enough.
infrastructure.
Is there a feedback loop in place with the UIDI? Do we have the competence in the UIDI to take on both these suggestions? Is something we will debate about. I'm coming to Nikhil Pava, but I'll get a quick word from Nikhil Kumar also there. Nikhil Pava says suspend UIDI. Jaggi says go slow on UIDI. Where Arvind Gupta says plug the loopholes if any, but don't go slow, don't suspend. Nikhil Kumar, your view.
I think suspension of Aadhaar is something which is not as simple as it's said, because Aadhaar is now linked for various different programs, right? For example, if you take the direct beneficiary transfer program, the whole idea of having Aadhaar seeded, whether it's in the PDS scheme or whether it's in the LPG scheme, is to essentially enable people to get their part of the beneficiary services directly into their bank account. So in this case, there is no way UIDI is actually involved in this process. It works on what is known as the Aadhaar payments bridge. Over $2 to $3 trillion have been transferred through this as a part of a DBT program. It's something which is renowned around the world. And it's also proven that people have actually accepted and find this beneficial. So I think suspension on UIDI is not really going to serve the purpose. That's basically like saying that there's an accident on the road, let's just stop people from driving cars on the road. I agree to what Jaggi is saying, because essentially the issue right now that we're all facing is there is unnecessary, unwarranted need, or the speed at which various different government agencies are asking people to link Aadhaar with their own databases. And all of this is being done for good reason, which is basically to verify people, to remove ghosts in the system and so on. But I think the speed at which we are doing without India having a data protection law and so on and so forth, I think this is something which is probably dangerous, and I think we should slow it down there.
The words that are being used are interesting this evening. This is dangerous, the data protection laws are required. But I'll go across to Pranesh Prakash, who's also joining us on the India Development Debate this evening. And we've had opinions that have gone from suspension to let's go the full hog, plug the loopholes, to saying have a calibrated, slow approach. But do you believe that the government's push to Aadhaar is perhaps a little too hard without fixing privacy and security concerns? The security issues, the privacy laws, they're all not as mature as at the speed at which Aadhaar is being pushed across the spectrum.
For me, while privacy and security are important, the most important thing that Aadhaar harms is inclusion. So right now we see that biometrics having been mandated across multiple states and multiple programs. Let's remember, this is not necessarily mandated by UIDAI, but by various government entities, has actually resulted in large-scale exclusion. If you look at the Jharkhand PDS report, survey that was done by Jean Rez and Ritika Khera, the findings are quite stark for a variety of reasons, which for UIDAI, there is no difference between someone's biometrics not matching. Okay, for instance, for someone being old and not being able to go to a PDS center, which earlier they were able to send their ration card, those kinds of people get excluded. People get excluded when their biometrics don't match, and they don't match at a very alarming rate. Even if the rate is 5%, that means in a country as large as India, 50 million people are getting excluded. So biometrics not matching because they've either worn out or because of old age or a variety of reasons, that kind of exclusion which is happening right now because of Aadhaar and biometrics being mandated across multiple programs by state governments, firstly needs to stop. And the only way to effectively stop this is for UIDAI to say, from today onwards, we're not going to be conducting biometrics-based authentication anymore. So that is a first step. For security, a variety of things need to be done. Security audits have been conducted by UIDAI in the past, but the results of those audits, and even who those audits have been conducted by, in RTI queries, they have not provided. So in order to regain trust, they must do that. They must undertake an overhaul security audit on a periodic basis, make the results public after fixing all the flaws that are noticed.
Okay.
They need to ensure something called tokenization is done, so that sector-specific IDs are used, and one ID to rule them all is not done, because that will actually end up harming everyone involved.
Okay.
Sector-specific IDs is what we need.
Okay, Pranesh, you made a few comments. I'm going to get Arvind Gupta coming, because you're questioning the entire biometric mechanism that's in place, which is in some sense underpins the entire Aadhaar framework. Arvind Gupta, quick counter from you, and then I'm coming to you, Nikhil Pava.
See, I think what Pranesh says is somebody's biometric is mandated by a particular scheme. I can't comment on that. From a UID perspective, it's both the iris scans, is the fingerprints, and also an OTP. So, and we sometimes keep forgetting the OTP, which comes on your mobile phone linked to the Aadhaar number. As simple as that. So, if any of the three mechanisms fail, then we have to use an assisted mode or go to an Aadhaar center. But otherwise, between the three, I tend to believe that something would work. But what Pranesh talks about is a minuscule minority. I think what people tend to forget is the 40 crore people who are identityless, which Aadhaar enables and empowers to get an identity today and are in the system. Sometimes, while everybody needs to be empowered and every single person needs to be able to access their benefits and their payments and schemes that they are entitled to, I think a few cases are cited, but the millions and millions and crores of cases which have benefited because of the use of Aadhaar and the digital infrastructure are never talked about. So I think it's important to see both the perspectives and make sure, as I said, that the few that get excluded because of technology don't get excluded. They have, and in my opinion, if you use the three combinations, you can really not exclude anybody. But there could be cases, and if those are cases that exist, one needs to make sure that they are not excluded.
All right, I'm going to take this across to Nikhil Pava. Nikhil, as things stand, suspension is off the table. It's perhaps not an option. We've gone a tad too far to talk about suspension right now. But what is it, and we want to make this a constructive debate and not just, we told you so and it all went wrong. What is it that the Unique Identification Authority needs to do to capture and plug the weaknesses in the system? What are some of the things that you would recommend for it to do for things to be far more foolproof than they are right now?
So I'm going to go back to my point about suspension of Aadhaar at this point in time, because given the vulnerabilities that have been pointed out so far, including the fact that, in fact, at one point in time they were running, NIC was running access to the CIDR on an HTTP connection instead of an HTTPS connection, which is non-secure and can be sniffed. Aadhaar is effectively currently a national security vulnerability. And in order to protect the data of our citizens, we must right now suspend the operations and launch a thorough investigation into the current situation there, because we don't know what other loopholes are there. An ongoing process with access still available is going to potentially expose our citizens to more vulnerabilities. That's why I'm calling for the suspension. In terms of fixing this process, I think the most important aspect is to make it optional. If someone wants to use an Aadhaar, they should be allowed to get one. But those who don't want to expose themselves to such risks should have the choice to not get one. By making it mandatory doesn't necessarily make people secure. We need to allow the usage of other IDs and not have Aadhaar as a single ID across multiple services. Because again, it becomes a single point of failure, and a lot of this data has already been exposed, probably scraped. It's on sale has also been found. We should allow people to revoke their IDs and get their data deleted if they have already been forced to get an Aadhaar. There needs to be a purpose limitation in terms of what an Aadhaar can be used for. I also think at this point in time we need to rethink the entire eKYC process, because this is personal identifiable information which is being sent out to private databases, and the UIDI has no control over the vulnerabilities there.
Okay, fair enough. Nikhil,
Lastly, biometrics should not be used, because biometrics we leave everywhere. So I'm making Pranesh's point again.
Yeah, exactly. You made Pranesh's point on biometrics, and we've debated that. Okay, you're making some drastic suggestions, and hopefully we'll debate at least some of them through the course of the next half an hour. But Jaggi, one point that I think Nikhil was hinting at is, and again, without talking of suspension, do you think there's a need, Jaggi, for an external audit of UIDI's own, data security protocols? Do you think that's something that needs to happen for us to know how foolproof is the mechanism?
Absolutely. The thing about security is it's always going to be a moving target. What Nandan Nilekani thought was secure enough in say 2010, today we are in 2018. I mean, criminals are always going to get better and better, which means that security needs to be reviewed almost on every quarterly or a 6-monthly basis. So you need a system where government is very agile and constantly seeing how it can think. It must have a dedicated ethical hacker system which regularly looks at this. So you need to have, and governments typically are not agile. They tend to have one note and one order, and they think everything will fall into place. Whereas this is not a system that can be run on the basis of a Babu run thing. You need agility in the system, you need constant correction. So that's what they need to create. So external feedback is absolutely critical. Without that, you cannot do this.
All right, external feedback is important, and without which you cannot do this is an important point that Jaggi is talking about. But Arvind Gupta, just to take that point forward, does UIDI need to have a robust system to receive feedback? I mean, look at the kind of feedback that's coming from this very show itself. Do they need to perhaps engage enough with whistleblowers, ethical hackers to make it more foolproof? I mean, I'm at least candid that both supporters and bashers of Aadhaar on this channel and on this show are talking about making it a more foolproof mechanics. Do you believe, whether it's feedback, whether it's whistleblowers, ethical hackers, more engagement on all those fronts is perhaps required?
Yeah, I think there has been a lot of hackathons, ethical hacking. There has been audits that have been done, and somebody has pointed it out. Sometimes those reports are not shared for the obvious reasons, but a lot more can be done. I think right now it's not only about what has been done internally, it's also about managing the perception and the trust. And the more open any system and the people who manage the system become, it creates more trust in the system. And remember, 90% of this is about trust and trust in the system than anything else. And it's important to create that. But I do want to bring about another point about the eKYC that Nikhil mentioned. I think two things. What eKYC does is, instead of doing a paper-based verification, it does an Aadhaar-based eKYC verification. Now, if you compare the two systems, paper gets replicated all the time. I mean, your identity, you don't even control who has it, who has that piece of paper that you sign and says self-attested and self-verified. What eKYC does is it actually just transfers that paper into a digital format and sends it to the service provider that you have. You have a lot more control on that. So I disagree with Nikhil's point that eKYC brings about more vulnerabilities. If the system provider of a telecom company which has done eKYC is so bad, the telecom company is accountable, because they could lose your paper and use that paper could be shared, that your paper identity could be shared by multiple people. Today, eKYC saves billions of dollars to these companies to bring down the cost of doing business, serve the low-end customers. Banking is a great example of that. All the Jandan accounts are enabled by this eKYC process.
Okay.
So getting rid of something is not the solution. The solution is to plug the loopholes and make a process better.
Okay, I'm coming to you, Pranesh, but I'm glad, Arvind, you're acknowledging the fact that trust needs to be built, because frankly, forget about trust. What we have right now is a great degree of mistrust. Anyone who's questioning anything about the Aadhaar is seen as an anti-national. FIRs are being filed, whether it's an activist or a journalist, and that climate of mistrust needs to go, and the government needs to walk an extra mile when it comes to that. I'm glad you're taking that point on board. But Pranesh Prakash had to come in counter the point that you're making on eKYC. Quick rebuttal from Pranesh Prakash.
Not just on eKYC, saying that Aadhaar has been open to criticism, has held hackathons, I'm not quite sure on what basis that is being said. The hackathons were not security related hackathons. Those hackathons were about how one could use Aadhaar in various businesses. Those were the kinds of hackathons that were held. Since last year, friends of mine, Srinivas Kodalian, and we have been trying to find ways of reporting vulnerabilities to UIDAI. There is not a single email address even or a form on the UIDAI website in order to report security vulnerabilities. And any kinds of reports that are sent to the email addresses of the CEO, etc., they never get any responses. So color me a little bit skeptical in believing that Aadhaar is actually open to fixing security vulnerabilities. On another point I'd like to make is that right now there are multiple aspects where consent has not been taken for sharing people's data. At the very beginning, we were told that Aadhaar would be a system where only yes, no responses would be given. Right now, it is a system where full details, which are completely searchable, are being provided to various states under things called the state resident data hubs, under things called the people hub of each state, and we have a situation where things like the DBT seeding viewer are being misused by people to look up Aadhaar related details. Now, all these things must immediately be put a stop to because people have not consented to these. And the original plans for Aadhaar actually don't allow for this. Indeed, the Aadhaar Act, in my reading, doesn't allow for these things to exist. So on what basis forget about the UIDAI, because the problem, I keep telling people, the problem is not with the UIDAI alone. There's a much larger problem that we have in India right now with regard to biometric data, with regard to data protection. And unless we tackle the overall problem, we're indeed failing.
No, absolutely, Pranesh, and I think data protection is an issue.
Is transparency.
Right. Pranesh, data protection and transparency is an issue that we will discuss in just a bit from now. But Nikhil Kumar, I want to take your attention to the composition of the UIDAI. And I think one of the concerns is, does the authority have enough technocrats, or is it not being able to understand the complexity because of the bureaucratic quagmire? Is it too full of bureaucrats who perhaps don't understand this as well as a technocrat would, or many technocrats put together would? Does it lack the technocratic muscle really?
Well, you could argue both ways to say that always having great tech people on board is definitely an asset for something like UIDAI, because what we're talking about is national critical infrastructure. Just yesterday as we were discussing, I think UIDAI needs to set up a tech crack team or a SWAT team of sorts, which is basically working on this 24/7, just like how we have specialized teams to take care of different issues, whether it's cybercrime or cyber warfare and so on. I think UIDAI needs to have its own tech team. But let me bring this, bring another point. I think this discussion is largely, we've been focused only talking about tech. We need to understand that this is not just a technology problem. We tend to forget that technology is just an enabler. Right? A lot of things is built around processes, trust, and so on and so forth. I think there's just too much focus, which is why people like Nikhil Pava, I don't agree with him, because there's a lot of fear mongering around, on just telling people that there's something wrong with tech. It's not the tech, it's basically people, processes, systems, laws, and so on and so forth. If today, for example, if you are working with a telco and you have already done your KYC information, there are over 5,000 to 6,000 call center agents who have access to your data on who do you talk to, what does your SMS look like, what was your last month, who did you speak to, including your KYC information, which is probably 10x more than what your Aadhaar has, right? The same kind of information, whether you ordered from a Flipkart or whether you ordered from a Swiggy or tomorrow Google or a Facebook, all of these companies actually have more information about you. So I think, this trying to, create this fear mongering about people that, look, this is a tech problem, tomorrow the whole world will come down because of this, is actually wrong. What we really need is processes in place, and I think we should shift the debate from just making this a technology debate to more a process debate.
Okay. You've raised a valid question. Nikhil Pava, I'm going to come to you, but I need to take a quick break. Nikhil Kumar has accused you of fear-mongering. I'm sure you'll have a rebuttal to make. I'm coming to you after this quick break, after which we're going to discuss, is Aadhaar too big to fail? And is there fear-mongering that's happening on Aadhaar? Are we underestimating the potential upside of Aadhaar? Is just an elite, urban elite that's blocking the upside of Aadhaar for a large majority of India? We're asking those questions as well on the other side of this break, right here on the India Development Debate. You're with ET now. This is the India Development Debate, and we're debating the Aadhaar leaks. Nikhil Pava, you were accused of fear-mongering by Nikhil Kumar before the break, but I'm going to add a question to you before I come to you, which is, would you also agree that this perception that's being built of Aadhaar being, and I'm going to quote Shekhar Gupta here, who's called it, people calling it the most diabolical mass threat to India, is that completely misplaced?
Here's the thing, right? Shekhar Gupta is completely wrong about this, because to understand the impact that this is having on people, you have to go to places like Rajasthan and Jharkhand, where people have died because they haven't gotten their rations. 80-year-old women have had to go and trying to get their fingerprints try and get them working. They've been refused rations. People are suffering. This is not an elitist concept here that we're talking about. So, I'm going to ignore such kind of ad hominem attacks, including the one from Nikhil Kumar, because his is, if you don't have a response to a question, you just start accusing people of fear mongering, etc. These are legitimate issues. People's data has been leaked. It's been acknowledged by Arvind Gupta that personal identification information has been leaked. It's been published on websites. What more proof do you need that there is a problem that we need to solve? This is becoming a national security risk for us. So we need to address this. The other point that I wanted to respond to was this idea of getting more technocrats on board, which you'd mentioned. Let's face it, there were technical and technocratic people who had set the system up. So, bring them in for all good measure, but let's not forget that they're also responsible for this mess. And as far as I understood, the organization that Nikhil represents, iSpirit, was a bunch of volunteers who had built the system and were still helping fix the system and etc., called iSpirit. So there is a bunch of volunteers who've been looking at it. What have they been doing? I'm not so sure, because we have these problems that exist which have been proven. We need to fix those problems, get new people to come and fix it, because obviously the old ones have done a pretty shoddy job of it by the looks of it. On the eKYC part, I wanted to address a historical point. You could once upon a time get a SIM card without giving your personal information. The reason why the eKYC came in was because the government wanted to know who you are, not the mobile operators necessarily there, right? So even in so therefore, a simple yes or no, which means are you who you say you are answer, should be sufficient. Why do you need to give people's personal identification information to other places?
Okay.
I mean, I understand that they want to build businesses around that personal identification information, and that's fine.
Okay, I mean, I agree with some part of what you're saying. I get your point, Nikhil Pava.
A necessity here.
Right. Nikhil, I get your point. I think I agree with some parts of it. I disagree with a lot. But, Jaggi, I'm going to ask you what Nandan Nilekani referred to the anti-Aadhaar lobby as this Khan market consensus in an earlier interview with us a few months back. And at one level, do you believe this whole anti-Aadhaar stance is an elitist fight in that sense, a minority who have all the benefits deciding on the majority, a minority that has all the benefits saying their privacy perhaps is guarded against. In some sense, it's a very elitist anti-Aadhaar stance.
See, certainly it is certainly an elitist stance, because the only people who are worried about privacy are guys who have something to hide, and it may be a legitimate thing that you want to hide. So the point is, it is an elite concern, because 99% of the country will not be worried about what you are doing with their biometrics, because they are in a very basic subsistence livelihoods. So, but the point about it is, just because it's elite does not mean it is
Actually
wrong.
has poor people on video pointing out that they are concerned about their data being taken.
No, I know it's
There is
also
a
an
resource
elite.
that's available. I can share it with you.
But they are not
It's
the
on
ones
video.
protesting, Nikhil.
No, I agree, but the elite always uses the poor to fire their shots. So it's you see, all crony capitalism is on saying that we are going to help the poor. So similarly,
I'm sorry,
Let him complete.
then we are damned if you
Nikhil,
we do,
Nikhil,
if we
let
damned
Jaggi
if we
complete.
don't, in a sense.
Nikhil, let Jaggi complete. Nikhil, let Jaggi complete his point, and then I'm coming to you and Pranesh. Jaggi, please
no,
complete.
I don't think you should dismiss the elite concern. All I'm trying to say is that there are many things that need fixing and we should fix them. That's a different issue. But the fact is, as of now, the elite actually happily gives the biometrics to everybody, from the US government to Gmail to Chinese smartphone makers, to everybody, and his aunt has got your biometrics and your details and your privacy details. You have not raised a question about it. But now you think if your own government gets it, you think there is something criminal about it. We need to fix the problem. That's a different issue. All I'm trying to say is that total privacy is a lost cause. What we need is a legal backing, and people from outside the government who can authorize whose information can be given to somebody else. That's what we need. We should not get into blaming the whole system for this.
Okay. I know Pranesh wants to come in, but Arvind Gupta, quick point. Is a strong privacy law the key? The fact that Aadhaar needs to be underpinned on a very strong privacy framework, and in the absence of that, we will keep having debates like this. We will keep having issues of Aadhaar leakage. Is that the most critical thing that needs to be fixed? Arvind Gupta.
I think the country, there are two aspects I would try to bring in. Aadhaar is one of the biggest digital infrastructure in the world, owned by a government or a country. No other infrastructure of this scale is owned by a country or a government. Every other infrastructure which services more than 1 billion people or has 1 billion users is a privately owned company, and we don't question them. So I think all these things everybody is saying is to make sure that there is an underlying positivity in that, is to strengthen this infrastructure that India has created. We may be showing a lot of concern, but eventually it is to strengthen the system. So I see a positive message there. Two, I think there is the data security, data privacy. You're talking about the law that I think is, and there are a lot of committees that are already set up to frame the right law, is absolutely essential. The digital first economy that India is building. I think more data is leaked by our cell phones and smartphones that we use than anything else. So I think we need a very strong data security, data privacy law, and that will apply to all the other digital giants, and as much apply to Aadhaar. So that there is no ambiguity about it. I would like to make a clarification that Nikhil Pava quoted that I said that the PII has been compromised. I said I have not said that. My point is very limited. That if PII information is available there, it needs to be treated with a lot of accountability, a lot of trust, and a lot of responsibility. And investigation remains to ascertain what has been leaked and what has not been.
All right, get the point there. Pranesh, I'm going to come to you, and just talking about the broader law that's required for data protection and all of that. Do you believe the government should have waited for a data privacy framework, got that ring fence before pushing the pedal on mandatory Aadhaar linkage? Do you believe that would have made Aadhaar far more palatable than it is right now to a vast section of people?
Not necessarily, because the problems with Aadhaar, as I'd mentioned earlier, for me, privacy and data protection are lesser degree problems. The first degree problem, the most important problem, and which elitism in the media, rather than elitism in terms of concern mongering, is responsible for not covering, is actually people being deprived of their rights, of benefits, of even their lives, because of callous governments requiring and mandating biometrics. Now, these aren't always through circulars. These aren't necessarily through laws. These could be through the software system as well. The software system, for if it does not accept OTP authentication, for instance, then biometrics, and if people aren't doing demographic authentication, then biometrics is what you're left with. So the first thing to do in order to plug exclusion is to put a stop to biometric authentication immediately. Right now, the state that is best in terms of biometric authentication, that has the least number of failures, is Andhra Pradesh. And that, last I saw, figures were around 3%. Now that itself is in the millions if you convert that into numbers. Right? So it might be a small, minuscule percentage, but in terms of the number of people who are affected, it's in the millions. UIDAI at the central level does not even publish these figures. So we don't know at the central level how many are being excluded. So that is a very, very important thing. The amount of savings that are being done through Aadhaar by counting ghost beneficiaries includes these people who actually aren't able to authenticate themselves. No, please let me have one more point, which is that I'm in favor of a national ID. But a centralized biometric system is calling for breach. Even the NSA, which is the most sophisticated intelligence agency in the world, has had its security breached multiple times, last by the shadow brokers. In the US, more than 5 million federal employees' fingerprint data was leaked and stolen, possibly by Chinese agents. And if that happens in India, then this entire system won't be trustworthy. So
fair enough. Pranesh, you made your point.
Biometrics is the way to go if the government interests on biometrics.
Pranesh, you made your. I've just got 3 more minutes on the show, and I want to get closing comments from all my panel. Nikhil Kumar, to you first, and then I'm coming to Nikhil Pawar. Nikhil Kumar, is there a case for the government now, in light of all that's happened, to give up on its obsession of mandatory linkage? Should it push for quiet adoption of Aadhaar?
Yeah, I think most panelists have been talking about UIDI as the center of the problem. We need to understand that UIDI doesn't have any other job other than running the Aadhaar system, which is basically the authentication system. All the other rules and regulations are made by different ministries and by different regulators. For example, KYC is handled for banking by RBI, KYC for telecom by TRAI, and so on. So we have to appeal to these individual agencies and work with them and put out our concerns, and UIDI is not the agency which is responsible for this. Number one. Similarly, all the ministries which are asking you to link for various different programs are doing this so that they deliver services better to people in the form of direct beneficiary transfers.
One is disputing that, Nikhil, but should they make it optional very quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. I think definitely there people can take more time. I just want to offer one solution. There are 2 solutions that I want to offer rather than just going on and criticizing on what needs to be done. Number one solution, which we have spoken about this, is that we need a data regulator in India. It is not just going to be Aadhaar, it is going to be the database of a telecom provider, it will be a database of a bank tomorrow, it will be a database of a startup, or tomorrow of a big social media company. We need a data regulator in India for the age that we are living in, number one. Number two, if we need to give up biometrics as an authentication system, the government has to go on an awareness campaign, get all the people to link their mobile numbers with their Aadhaar number. Only then we can use OTP as an authentication mechanism. Otherwise, we will be in a situation where 500 and 600 million people will be outside the system. And again, the same set of people will come and argue on TV and say that we are doing an exclusive system.
I get your point there. I think it's a valid suggestion of a data regulator. That does find my fancy for sure, and I hope the government is going to be listening to that. But I've got just 30 seconds for an answer, Nikhil Pawar. Will Aadhaar be less used if it were to be made optional, you think?
Yes, and I think that would be a good idea. So my solutions: 1, make it optional; 2, allow other IDs; 3, allow people to revoke their ID and delete their data if they want to, give them the option, because you can use other IDs as well. Allow derived authentication, pseudonymization and tokenization. Have a legal right to recourse. You should be allowed to sue the entity that has leaked your Aadhaar data, because the Aadhaar Act currently doesn't allow it. Have purpose limitation, no biometrics. Suspend the program for now and do a thorough audit before more people get risked. Spend on a grievance redressal system, because this is a real mess that we're dealing with right now, and have a privacy law and a data protection regulator.
10 points I think you've made, Jaggi. How many of them find fancy with you? Having a data privacy regulator, have an external audit, those are points that I'm sure no one can disagree with. And of course also go slow, make it optional. Do you agree with that as well, Jaggi?
No, I think go slow should be only about linking further more and more things with Aadhaar.
Linking.
That we should do it after a complete audit is done and the thing has been rendered substantially safe. So the slowdown should be, in any case, you have reached 120 crore people. So you have only 5 or 10 crore left. So what more speed are you going to achieve in terms of expanding Aadhaar? It's only the linkages that need to be slowed down, and you need to fix the data and privacy problems first.
Okay, 30 seconds. Arvind Gupta, is the government listening, or is the government going to sit in its high horse and say, we know what's right?
No, I think the government has been listening. There has been a lot of innovative views. And I think the big point I do want to raise is that there is going to be a challenge in this new digital age of balancing innovation with regulation, with policy. And the government needs to walk this very tight rope on how do you balance between innovation and regulation and savings and the many different innovative uses of Aadhaar that are happening. And suggestions are always welcome. I've always said the feedback is important to improving the system, which is a national digital infrastructure.
All right, but on that note, we are completely out of time here and can't thank my stellar panel enough. R. Jagannathan, Arvind Gupta, Pranesh Prakash, Nikhil Kumar, Nikhil Pava, and everybody else who's been a part of this show. Thanks very much for being with us, because this really, and of course Arvind Gupta, for really putting things in perspective and for helping us arrive at solutions for Aadhaar. We've perhaps gone a tad too far to now talk about scrapping or suspending Aadhaar altogether. I think we now need to look at solutions to ring-fence Aadhaar, talk about data protection laws, and perhaps the data regulator is not a bad suggestion either.
Oh yes, one phrase captures all that needs to be done. Pause, think and proceed. Thanks for being with us in this edition of India Development Debate on ET Now. Up next is Top 10 at 10. Good night.